Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, it's 61 years this week since Nigeria became an independent country, and 107 years since the British brought together the mainly Muslim North and the largely Christian South. Since then, Nigeria has been riven with ethnic divisions and rivalries, not least about how to share the country's considerable mineral wealth and how to come up with a more equitable distribution of political power. Following 3 years of a bitterly divisive civil war between 1967 and 1970, calls for restructuring and for a national dialogue to discuss simmering resentments have grown louder each year, particularly from the southeast, the southwest, and from minority groups across the country who want to air their grievances and hopefully soften their clenched fists. So, with Independence Day approaching and Nigerians reflecting on what has led them to this point, is there hope that this country's leadership will wake up to its responsibilities and help to chart a new, more inclusive future for Nigeria? Well, to help us reflect on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the respected constitutional lawyer and human rights activist, Clement Nwankwo, who's also the executive director of the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center in Abuja and convener of the Civil Society Situation Room. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Charles.
You made particular effort, so we appreciate that.
Thank you, Charles.
So what happened to that moment of extraordinary pride 61 years ago in 1960 when Nigerian leaders spoke of a future of unparalleled promise? I mean, how did it all go wrong? Because, 61 years ago, Britain handed over power to a young, idealistic nation, and the mood was very different, wasn't it?
The mood then was optimistic. First of all, really to correct that I was convener of the Situation Room. I'm no longer convener.
Okay.
But the mood in 1960 was very optimistic. I think a lot of Nigerians then looked forward to a country which would be the leader in Africa, which had a lot of potentials, very educated people. The sky looked like the limit. But a lot has happened since then. The country has fought a bitter civil war, come out of that, suffered several years of brutal military dictatorship, came on again with some hope in 1999 that civilian rule would take us to democracy, would take us to the hopes that were ignited in 1960. And we've gone through a lot, up and down since then. As we speak today, I think it's a gloomy atmosphere. I think a lot of people feel exceedingly sad that all of that hope have dissipated. Young people are leaving the country. People who live in the country are worried about day-to-day survival. The government is offering very little hope or promise of improvement in living conditions and living circumstances. So right now it's a very, very gloomy 61 years of Nigeria's independence from Great Britain.
Well, let's sort of look at it systematically from that period in 1960 to get a sense of how things have got to where they are. Do you think that the Nigerian leaders there were at independence, the leaders that Britain bequeathed to Nigeria, had time to really meet and work together to define what this project called an independent Nigeria was going to be?
I think that the country went through teething problems that most African countries went through post-colonial rule and struggled to find a system of rule that could help to take the country past the colonial or post-colonial period. And at the period that the civilians took over from the British in 1960, we began to see across the African continent the ambitions of soldiers coming from the barracks. And it wasn't just Nigeria, it was in Togo, it was in Dahomey, Benin Republic,
Ghana.
There was a lot of struggle by the military to seize political power. And it happened in Nigeria with, of course, dire consequences that we also then went through the double tragedy of a civil war.
Two military coups, then a civil war. Quite debilitating.
Yes, quite debilitating for the country. And so we never really have had that opportunity to sit down to say, wait a minute, where do we want to head to? It's always been struggle for political power by the military and political elites. Yes, we've had the longest period of civilian rule, but all of that has also been the political elite making their calculations about individual advantage for themselves, their family members, their acolytes, and the rest of that. Very little time has been spent developing for the country, for the citizens of the country, a future, a direction. And I think that's the problem that Nigeria is going through. That's the problem most African countries are going through.
But was that something that happened in that burst of time immediately following independence? Because I mean, a lot of people speak of that as a sort of golden era when there was so much development, even after the Civil War, the Reconstruction and all of that, the massive sort of focus on infrastructure building and development, and the economies growing, and, you know, institutions working properly and so on.
Well, I think that the military gave as part of the reasons for their overthrow of the civilian government in 1966, the problems that have remained, even escalated, such as corruption, failure of the political leaders to map out a development plan, failure to address the challenges, even political, of the country, failure to allow for democracy to thrive, muzzling of opponents and opposition. All these were the reasons given in 1966. Yes, those who took over reign either in the regions that Nigeria started out with or later in the states, what we have seen is, of course, that when you look back, in some ways, sadly for the country, there's some sort of nostalgia. Some people, as we speak,
it always looks greener, doesn't it?
It always looks greener backwards.
Which is rather sad.
Which is sad. And when you look at, even very sadly, some of the most brutal periods of this country's history, whether it's the dictatorship of General Ibrahim Babangida or the more violent dictatorship of General Sani Abacha, sometimes you look back and you wonder, was it better then? And I think it's a sad commentary on Nigeria that anybody would look at the present time and look backwards and wonder whether it was better. When
Nigeria should be enjoying the fruits
when the country
of
should
democracy
be on
and so
on an upward rise.
Right. That's a very interesting analysis. I think it was the late Adamu Chiroma, who was the former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, who said that the point of departure from the right path of rectitude for Nigeria came in 1966, when the country stopped doing things according to the law. Is that a fair analysis?
Well, I think certainly looking back with hindsight, you would say that the military's involvement in politics has been one of the most underdeveloping character of this country. When you look back to the military era, whether in 66 or 79 or 83, when the military seized power, you look back and each time the military come, it talks about the civilians being corrupt, it talks about the civilians failing to address the development concerns.
And then they do exactly the same.
And then they come in and they do worse. So you really haven't seen the military playing the role it claims.
Of the corrective.
It's never been correcting. They've always set examples that have worsened Nigeria's institutions.
Although some would argue, and I don't know whether that is right or wrong, but certainly some have argued that the regime of Murtala Mohammed in 1975-76 was a corrective one.
Well, I don't agree with that. I think that he did things that destroyed a lot of the institutions, destroyed the judiciary especially, violated processes, destroyed the civil service. And unfortunately, I think Nigerians loved Nigerians then, but I think a lot of people have gone through history and began to see that it was a catastrophic period in Nigeria's history, that you had such an intervention that, again, demobilized and destroyed a lot of the institutions. And these institutions have never recovered since then. And he didn't have enough time, 6 months. But clearly, maybe if there was more time, and I don't want to say whether there should have been more time, but if there was more time, maybe Nigerians would have seen that regime for what it was. But certainly it contributed to where we are today, which is really a destruction of Nigeria's institutions.
Right, even though they did say they were going to hand over in 1979, and President Obasanjo, who took over, went ahead and did that.
Well, I think certainly the intervention that came meant that whoever took over from him understood that they didn't have control of all of the levers of powers.
The seat was hot.
The seat was hot, and so I think that General Obasanjo knew what he had to do, which was get out of office.
I remember interviewing you when Nigeria turned 50, more than a decade ago, and you said that the country's leadership had been seized by people who have no integrity, no morals, and no vision. Is that still your position today, or have you had cause to see things differently based on the leadership that's taken over Nigeria since then?
I think that what we have seen each time, like I said, we look back and we look at the history and we look at the leadership, political leadership, and we see that where we are today is perhaps worse than where we were yesterday. And I think that that's really the complaint and the anger of most Nigerians, that rather than improve, things seem to be deteriorating, whether it's on the economic front, the political front, the social front, on all spheres and in all areas. You don't get the sense that the country is moving in the right direction. You get a sense like we are actually going backwards. And I think that for all Nigerians who love this country, who want to see this country play the role that it should play, not just in Africa, but in the world, it is disappointing the kind of political leadership that this country has had to endure in the last several years.
I think it was Senator Ali Ndume, and I make reference to these people because they were all spoken to in the context of Nigeria's independence. Senator Ali Ndume, who said that the problem in Nigeria is that majority of the leadership is bad, and when you have the majority like that, the end result is bound to be negative.
I don't disagree with him. I think that if you do have a leadership that is selfless, that is genuine, that is even self-enlightened, then that leadership would understand that even for the interest of the political elite, for the interest of the political class, it can at least do a whole lot of things that responds to the needs and demands of citizens. That's not what we're seeing. We see people in office, all they are concerned about is themselves, their family. The whole gamut of nepotism and tribalism has escalated beyond anybody's imagination.
Do you get tired of saying these things over and over again? Because I mean, I've known you for quite a long time. You know, I was an international correspondent in Nigeria. You were making the same points during the military era. You were making the same points during civilian times, and you're making the same points today.
It is tiring. If the question is, do you intend to stop? The answer is no, but it is tiring. And even for you, Charles, who has come such a long way in analyzing Nigeria yourself, you are like a moving history of this country in the context of what you know. You would see that there is no reason at all at this time to say we should stop talking about the problem.
Okay, let me ask you to stay with us. We've got to take a break. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the constitutional and human rights lawyer Clement Nwankwo ahead of Nigeria's 61st Independence Day celebrations on Friday. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now this week, Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, marks 61 years of independence from British colonial rule. It's as much a time for celebration as it is a time for reflection, celebration of how this country has grown from a backwater more than 6 decades ago to become Africa's biggest economy today, a symbol and signal to Africans everywhere, but also considered reflection on the country's serious security concerns, endemic corruption, high unemployment, crumbling infrastructure, and particularly the challenge of leadership. So why have things not gone the way Nigerians had hoped since independence in 1960? And with me in the studio, the constitutional lawyer and human rights activist Clement Nwankwo, who's also the executive director of the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center and was the convener of the Civil Society Situation Room. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us.
Thank you.
Do you see the current administration of President Buhari taking steps to tackle those problems of the past that have laid Nigeria low?
This administration has been in office for 6 years plus. It has less than 2 years to go, indeed even far less than 2 years, because you are going to have elections happening sometime in the early of 2023. There will be nominations by political parties, and real serious political campaigning would begin by mid next year. So the reality is that this president has less than a year in practical terms.
Becomes a lame duck president.
Becomes lame duck. And if in 6 years plus you haven't responded to a lot of the demands that citizens have, if indeed 6 years plus the agitations and anger across the country, the insecurity, the failure of the economy is so high, then I have my doubts that the administration would have learned the character of reversing and changing the way it has taken the country in the last 6 years. So I have my doubts that this administration would be interested or is prepared to address the challenges of the country. I would be pleasantly surprised if it is able to do so, but I have my doubts, and I think for a lot of Nigerians there is huge doubts that this administration is prepared to bequeath a legacy that will endure after it has left office. But certainly, a lot of Nigerians are looking to the next elections, and the expectation that Nigerians have of this administration is that it will at least enable the conduct of a proper, free and fair election.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because I mean, we see 2023 coming ever closer, the next presidential election. What can Nigeria do in that election? Or perhaps I should say, what can the leadership do in that election to sustain its democracy built on the rule of law? And if it does that, can you see a better tomorrow for this country? In other words, does 2023 offer a way out of Nigeria's political and economic quagmire?
I think it does. Certainly, well, although I've said this several times, sometimes you say it couldn't be worse than what was, but I think that for a lot of people, the expectations are high, that at least there will be some leadership that will emerge. And a lot of us, a lot of people, and I do believe very strongly in this country, I think that this country should remain strong and be able to move forward. I think that if the country is able to organize free and fair elections in 2023, that there will be a leadership in this country that will emerge, that will begin to address several of the challenges that this country has faced, that has remained unaddressed. So I think we can only hope that things can get better.
But based on what you're seeing today, I mean, with Nigerians already beginning to immerse themselves in the most spectacular pre-election fever, can you see that 2023 ballot being transparently and untypically free and fair?
Well, we hope so. First of all, we expect that the National Assembly will give us a new electoral bill in the coming days. They have set up committees to harmonize what has been passed by both houses. We hope that it does reflect what Nigerians are asking for, which is a bill that addresses the prospect of free and fair elections, use of technology in transmission of results, in conduct of elections. We do hope that when this is passed, it is sent to the president, that he assents to it. And we do hope that the president will understand that he is not going to be on the ballot. He will not be on the ballot. He's not on the ballot for elections in 2023. And the key thing, which is what President Jonathan, in spite of his failings, is recognized for, the ability to conduct free and fair elections. And our hope and expectation is that President Buhari will understand that he benefited from that and will prepare to ensure that all of the stakeholders, the institutions involved in elections, the Independent National Electoral Commission, the police, the security services, and everyone else who is involved in assisting the conduct of free and fair elections will play their role impartially, non-partisanly, and in a way that enables Nigerians to cast their votes freely.
So, come 2023, and the leaders continue to fail, what then for Nigeria?
I fear that this country cannot go down any deeper. We're probably really at the bottom. And the only way you go when you're at the bottom is really sink down into the mud. And I think that if this country doesn't pull out from that deep pit that it is in now, then I really worry about whether this country will continue.
But is it as much up to the leadership as it is to the followership? Because we keep talking about the leadership. I mean, if things were to go really bad, corrupt politicians manipulating the elections again and all that sort of thing, the wrong leader taking over, should it turn to the followers to do something? And if so, what might that something be?
Well, I always think that the leader is the one who helps to give direction to the country. And if you have a leader who is worse than the followers, then the country is sunk. So followers are able, or citizens are able to react to bad leadership, but not in the way when that leadership is also a part of the corrupting process of the electoral process, doesn't allow for free elections, doesn't allow for dissent, doesn't allow for citizens to freely express themselves. When you have that kind of leadership, then what you would see would be revolt. And nobody has control of that situation when it happens. So this country, I think, when it has the right leadership, if it can have the right leadership, will begin to pull and emerge.
Right. Well, we're in the sort of dying moments of the chat. Do you think Nigerian governments, this one in particular, and others in the recent past generally, tend to make a lot of enemies? I mean, because, for instance, people who've been traditional advocates of good governance and justice, and who initially supported President Buhari, for instance, when he came to office, people like Wole Soyinka, yourself, Femi Falana, and many more have turned against him. I mean, that seems to be consistent with a lot of administrations.
I think people like us have been consistent in advocating good governance. We advocated that in the previous regime where President Jonathan was in office. We advocated for free and fair election, and we pressured to have free and fair election in 2015. Jonathan lost that elections, and all of us were hopeful that that example that President Jonathan set will help to propel the country in the right direction. I think that that's what a lot of people are disappointed about. A lot of us are disappointed about. And I think that administrations need to understand that there will continue to be people who will point to it or point out to it its failures, who will advise it, who will stridently criticize it for its failures. That won't stop, no matter what you do as an administration.
We've got about 30 seconds before we have to go. How will you be marking Nigeria's 61st Independence Day on Friday?
On Friday, I do have a couple of speaking engagements, and I will be doing that. But I think for a lot of people, it would be a time for reflection to ask, how did we get to where we are today? How can we get out of the wrath that we're in this country today? And I think for a lot of Nigerians, they would want to think positively and see something great ahead.
Clement Nwankwo, the constitutional lawyer and human rights activist, I want to thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you, Charles.
That's it for this edition of The Arise Interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and around the world, bye-bye and thank you for watching.